Hello and welcome back to Resolutionary Leaders. I'm Helena Gotto, your host, and today we have Lauren Caprio. Hello, Lauren.
Hi, how are you?
Lauren is someone that I love working with, and she is a director of employee and labor relations at a hospital. And we won't get into too much the nitty-gritty of actual real-life stories that could compromise people's anonymity, but we will be telling some fun stories today for sure. So, Lauren, tell us a little bit about you and how you ended up getting into the role that you're in.
Yes, I've been in HR for about 8 years now. I fell into HR, which I feel like a lot of HR professionals always say. I didn't go to school to be in human resources, but I've always worked in healthcare. I currently work at a hospital. And ever since I was a small child, actually, I used to work at my aunt's OBGYN office, and I knew I wanted to be in healthcare. Of course, as a young girl, I was like, I'm going to be a nurse. But yeah, I went to college, studied sociology, wasn't really focused on my studies at the time, like many people. And so I became an executive assistant at UCSF, which is probably one of the number one research hospitals in the United States. And then I moved up to where I currently live right now in Northern Nevada. And I was able to obtain a position as an office manager of an outpatient clinic. And then I really didn't see a lot of growth opportunity at the time in that position. And my hospital was hiring a brand new HR role, and it was an HR associate job. And so I went for it, got it, and was able, since it was a new job, to make it my own. Started doing a lot of generalist work and really found my niche in employee and labor relations, dealing with our bargaining units, dealing with employee conflict, employee engagement. And so I've just worked myself up to my current role as the director.
So that's an interesting little trajectory to get there. And one thing that I I think about for you in the role that you are, because it's such a it's a relatively small town. People have a lot of tenure at the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
That there seems like there's got to be a whole nother dynamic for you than, let's say, those of us who live in big cities like Los Angeles. You run into everybody that you work with in the grocery store and blah, 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 and then you're the person that they go to when they have a problem. What is that like for you, and how do you keep your boundaries up? Is there anywhere safe?
I think it's like with time. I think at first, when I first got into human resources and dealing with a lot of employee relations matters, being in a small town was difficult because I'd be out to, let's say, dinner with my husband, and somebody would come up to our table and be like, I can't believe X, Y, and Z happened. I'm trying to eat dinner. I can't even talk. I can't even eat a meal. So it's been challenging, but I think it's like setting up boundaries too, but it's helpful at the same time to be in a small community, because you start to get to know people on more of a personal level. And sometimes I find that's very helpful, like being like, oh, how are your kids? Or like, how did that ski race go? It's like making a connection with the people that you work with, which I think is amazing. But it's also setting personal boundaries of being like, hey, come and talk to me on Monday when we're in the office. And but it can be challenging at times because it's also like I used to work in San Francisco, which is huge. And I wouldn't really even think twice about going out and running into somebody from work. And you always still have to have that on your radar.
Yeah, I was thinking, because I've seen you like at the hospital and people are constantly coming up to you. It's like you can't just pop into the cafeteria because there's 15 people. But I wonder how that is. Most people, when you're going to have a difficult conversation or suddenly find yourself in one of those, you have some kind of sense of warning about it. And if you don't, it doesn't happen that often. But I imagine it happens for you like every single day.
Yeah, it does. It does. Yes, at least every single week, it definitely does. And it can be challenging, but at the same time, I think, again, like going back to personal connection with people, going into a situation like that, because of my experiences with them and interactions with them in the past, it allows me to tailor the way I communicate with them. Because I always tell people at least once a week, I'm like, I have 150 different personalities in my job. Like you, and I think over time it's been really beneficial for me because I'm like, okay, I know this person has these challenges, or we've been through this before, or I know this is going maybe outside of, work, this is going on. And like, how do we put all of that together? At the end of the day, HR professionals, sometimes I tell employees this all the time. I'm like, we're not human punishment. We're here as a resource to you. And so sometimes the things that happen in or outside of the workplace affect the way we treat each other or the way we act. And being able to know people, and especially the tenure, like over a period of time, like even when I worked in the clinics, I'm like, I remember when I worked with you in the clinics, when these were the challenges I might have had with you, but I don't know. It's a fine balance.
Yeah. How do you navigate your bias? You're going to have some innate, oh, well, I really like that person. So,
Mhm.
like, how do
Yeah.
you get through that? It sounds dodgy.
Yeah, it can be. And I think because I have been with my employer for over 13 years, and being in a small town, it's like you start making friendships with people and you have to know what that boundary is. And so there are things or in times where I have to go to my boss and be like, I can't be objective in this. I just can't. And so knowing when I can't be objective. At the same time, I think being upfront and honest in the situation is super important. So even if I'm in a disciplinary setting with an employee who I might have a bias about, but I want to give them the benefit of the doubt, I try to start with that and say, hey, I know that we know each other and we've had these experiences together. And I try to actually use that to my advantage, because at the end of the day, I want the employee to be successful. But I think you also need to know when your personal biases, when you're being super subjective, like when to be like, I have to disengage in this and call on somebody else.
Let's dig into this widely held belief
Mm.
that I think is very difficult for HR people to navigate, because you are there to help. You are there to help people succeed. And I think you get into this role because you're that kind of person. But then there becomes this, like you're saying, human punishment, where people, they don't want to go to HR. And then when they do go to HR, they come in hot. How do we, how do you navigate that? I know my experience is that people really like you and do feel supported by you. It just, there's still that overriding, oh, we don't want to go to HR. And then when they finally do go to HR, it's a complete dumpster fire,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, there was recently this really good New York Times article that was written, and it's so I forgot the exact title, but it was like, so HR is making you miserable. And it was a really good article. And honestly, after reading it, I was like, I wish I could send this to everybody where I work, because it really talks about HR being, a lot of HR professionals being like these empathetic people, and they want to be employee advocates, and but they also are very policy driven. And it's like a fine balance between the two. And that it's because there's such a misconception of what HR really does, is that it takes a toll on us as professionals, right? We're like, what we're trying to do what's best for the organization and the employee. And so it's hard because I always want to explain that but there's always bias on the other side too. And I don't know, in that article, you read through it and at the end you're like, yes. And then, but that gives you no resolution back to your question of what do we do in these situations? And how do you, I don't even know how to answer the question.
What were the main takeaways in the article?
I think that we, of course, burnout. There's a huge burnout from HR professionals, especially post pandemic, and that there's a ton of people leaving the profession and seeking other opportunities outside it because of the emotional, I don't want to say burden, but that the toll it has cost on people, and being always targeted as the bad guy or whatever, bad person. It's so that's where the article, you're like, but you're not giving me anything like to be like optimistic about. You're just left in like this crappy place. So I feel like the takeaway is, yes, we deal with a lot of crazy different situations. Most of us are empathetic people, but that the job, it's like you're juggling 60 different things. It's not just employee relations and conflict in the workplace, it's compliance, it's safety in the workplace, liability. There's just all these things. You are the jack of all trades, but it's hard to have employees understand what your role is, because you can't just go and tell everybody, this is actually what I do. You could, but it's difficult.
Yeah. I just had to tell somebody that she was getting replaced basically, but she had already put her hand up and said, I think I'm about to get a job and it's going to be a really quick turnaround. Like maybe you're going to get a day notice out of me. Right. And so we found someone, he's amazing. And then she didn't get the job. And so now it's Christmas and Thanksgiving, and not a good time to find a job in the role that she is currently in, and in the entertainment industry.
Yeah.
And so we are going to keep her on and to look and also hire this guy. Right. So are we not the nicest people ever?
Yeah. Right.
To start the conversation, I said to her, can I just clarify, when you gave your note, like when you said you were going to get this role, you said it would be a quick turnaround. Was that, so you wouldn't be giving the company 2 weeks? And she's like, no, it's just how it works. That's what my friends do. They just give notice. It's just the nature of, I was like, no, it's not how it works. Who told you that's how it works? You give 2 weeks. Like, you don't want to leave a company and leave them on those kind of terms. Like, company, and what does it look like to the other company that's hiring you that you just went and ditched this company with 2 weeks? And it was just the weirdest conversation. She was so offended by me suggesting that was an unprofessional thing to do, and I really struggled to comprehend her position. But she now hates me. She hates me now because I told her that was unprofessional. She disagrees with me. Meanwhile, we're keeping her on. It's not like I just said, we're giving you 2 weeks notice. Or 2 days notice.
Exactly. I think that's like the one thing my dad used to be like, he always instilled such a hard work ethic in me. Since the moment I could have a job and not get paid under the table by my aunt in her office, it's like, he was like, don't burn bridges, lay low if you can. Like, those are the things that like you never know when you're going to need 5 years from now to go back to your previous employer and be like, hey, like, I need a letter of recommendation, or hey, I need advice. It's you're more inclined when you leave on a good note.
Yeah. No, I don't know how we're not. There should be classes on. Are there classes on this at school?
Right. I think that's one of you actually had brought this up the last time I saw you in person, and I never really thought about it, but like especially for Gen Z, like like going through COVID, like lack of communication with like peers, like I've never really thought about it in like this is our new workforce. And I see it now that I'm like, oh yeah, there's like this awkward communication, or like whatever the next best thing is for me, I'm just going to jump to that when I don't really care about these relationships or see the significance in them. So yeah,
it's that this new workforce, it is significantly different for good reason. Growing up with a screen, and being isolated for a couple of years when they're in important years of their lives, wearing masks for however long, so you don't actually learn how to read people's facial expressions. And as leaders, as managers, learning how to manage that particular workforce, because it's different. We can't, like the thing about 2 weeks notice, that seems like a no-brainer. I wouldn't even, and her complete sort of, oh no, that's how it's done. That's what people do. It's just the nature of it. You get your new job and you go. I was like, no, it's not. Well, maybe for you, but it was actually learning how to manage people from just a different perspective. And I think it's in process. I don't think we're there yet.
I'm learning so much just because of the team I work on, and we are like a multi-generational team.
Yeah.
And I have a gal that she's a Gen Zer, and I adore her. But it's so funny just to see the differences in what's important to a Gen Zer versus someone I'm like a millennial. So I'm like, what? And then we have a baby boomer in our office, and
Oh my God.
it's so different and it's very insightful. It's taken me like almost 2 years to be like, oh, okay, I get where you're going with this, or I get why you're asking these things, or you're not afraid to ask for a raise, or why this is here. Or it's taken me a couple years to adapt, but I think it's being open-minded too, but and also being an influential like leader too, of somebody like I'm like hopefully instilling the right things in the newer generation and the newer workforce to be like, it's important to not burn bridges and just to not to give less than a 2 week notice, and it's like a courtesy, and the importance and significance of that.
Do you, and this is for me coming in to do more of this with you, do you guys have a leadership, like early management manager training program in place?
I would say on the surface level, no, we don't. We've thrown together like a new manager orientation just to check the boxes on certain things of like knowing our memorandum of understanding, knowing our disciplinary process, how to process this, how to onboard an employee. It's like the basics, but
Yeah.
not like from like the leadership skills side of it. And that's something that I do know our organization is investing in. And we've always had leadership classes probably the last 8 years, right? When I moved over to human resources, we started to engage with the local university and having a leadership series. But and I went through it, and it's like the classes they're all right. Like it depends. Some of them are insightful, but they're not about emotional intelligence or like what is a leader. It's not just your job title; it's your actions and identifying what type of leader you are. So no, we don't have that, but we're working towards having something. So especially when we see a new manager or somebody who goes from being like a frontline employee to up to a management position,
Yeah.
it's who's never dealt with the people aspect of their job before, and there needs to be something for people so they're successful.
And I think the learning how to hold people accountable while also keeping them engaged
Yeah.
is a really challenging shift for people going from an independent contributor to a manager. You're busy keeping track of yourself, making sure that you're doing what you need to do. Now suddenly you got to keep track of making sure everybody else is doing what they're supposed to be doing, and you're communicating it in a way that they understand. And then when they don't do it, communicating to them that they didn't meet
Yeah.
expectations. And I think that so many companies, there's the nice culture, and
Mhm.
you've gone from being a colleague and now you're the manager, and how to shift yourself into that role that now it's your job to hold these people that you used to probably bitch and moan about
Mhm.
the old manager together, and now you're that manager, right?
Yeah. We actually recently, in the past couple of weeks, we had a person who, went into a supervisor role, and they thought it was going to be completely different than, than how it turned out to be. And they're very good at their technical part of their job. The person had a lot of challenges because they went from being the individual contributor to being now these people's supervisor. And they told me, they're like, why can't they just put on their lab coat? I'm like, she's like, they know. And I'm like, they're testing you right now, what type of leader you're going to be. And that was so challenging for this person because it ultimately they wound up stepping down from the position because they're like, I don't want to I don't want to be someone's babysitter. And I hate using that analogy because I feel like people think it's derogatory, but at the same time, it's like, these are people. Like I always tell managers, I'm like, it's a minimum 50% of your job is people. Like, so you have to navigate through that. And I don't think it doesn't work in the workplace anymore to be like this autocratic leader and be like, this is what it is. Some places, sure, I know in my industry it's not. And it's you have to better get down to the nitty gritty and understand different, like you lead in different ways now and people don't care. I don't think that autocratic leadership style works anymore at all.
How would you suggest people utilize HR? And in a way that's more successful than, let's say, not going to HR and then bringing the dumpster fire. Like
Yeah.
what? Yeah.
I think it's about the culture, like in your workplace, and having it drive from the culture. I think employee resource groups are super important, that HR in some capacity is involved in that. We have a committee at our organization that are like who advocate for our values. And it's frontline employees from all clinical, non-clinical aspects of our health system. And we get together every 6 weeks and we talk about like what's going on in the health system. What are the rumors? How can we all work together to get the message out? Also to be a voice for the employees outside of the union. It's like, what are we hearing? What can we start doing from an engagement standpoint? How HR plays into that is like knowing that HR is a resource to people. Like when you have something going on in the workplace and you don't know how to navigate through that, and maybe it involves your manager, maybe it doesn't, you don't feel like you can go to your manager, come over, talk to us. Again, we're a resource. We're not here to be like, hey, you're in the wrong. Or maybe sometimes we are like, hey, let's take a step back and walk through this. And it's not punitive. And again, I stress the resource part in it because we're truly here to ensure that all the processes, our policies, also that our employees feel like they're contributing and that they're a part of our family. But I think it's the culture really and getting the buy-in from other employees.
Yeah, and the whole compliance and policy piece is challenging because once they come to you and let's say there is a policy that's been broken, it's formal, like it's on the record and you have to do something about it.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is a piece that creates the fear in people because they're not 100% sure of is this something that is going to get me in trouble or get my manager in trouble, and I don't want to get my manager in trouble, but I want to say something about it. I don't know how to navigate it. So yeah,
I try personally, like anytime I start a conversation with an employee, and especially if they say, oh, I want this to be confidential, I always tell them the truth. I'm like, depending on what you tell me, this might not be confidential because I have a duty at the end of the day. And I think just leading with that intent is very important. So there's not a misconception if they feel like you're breaking confidentiality when you lead being like, I have to be honest. I don't know.
Do you know what? And that's where what Tina and I do is priceless for you because you can say it possibly won't be confidential, but you can go to Helena and it will be, and then she can tell you whether or not you can who it is. Because that neutral third party that is not a mandated reporter is helpful for people to work their way initially through those conflicts while they're trying to work out what it is.
Well, and also like leading with that and then finding out maybe this is not something I have to report or I have to I always try to have an employee seek resolution with the guidance with us on their own. And so it's like when I hear, I'm like, I could get myself involved, but this is another way you could deal with this situation. And let's try it this way before I have to step in. But I'm like, also I try to preach. It's not bad if you come over to HR and ask for help. It's not bad. Your manager should be encouraging that. And I think that's where it's a hard situation for HR because it's easy for management to always blame HR. Oh, HR told me we can't give you a raise. It's easy.
No, we didn't.
And that's the one thing I do love about HR, especially when you're in a union environment. I'm like, no, this is what your union contract says. This is what this is. And explaining it. That's the one thing I'm like, I don't love policy and procedure, but I also do.
Right. Yeah. I think that it's easy to get stuck on historical narratives about what happened when I went to HR. And you don't actually really know because there's so much that HR does that they can't tell you they did.
Mm-hmm.
So I did nothing. No, actually, we did a hell of a lot. We just couldn't tell
Yeah.
you.
Well, and I try to explain that to people all the time. And I also say, because for you as an employee, you wouldn't want me spilling the beans on what we did with your personnel matter. And you have to respect that we are going down the proper channels and we can't always share with you what that outcome is. But we hope that you trust that we're following the process. I think the more of those conversations that happen, it starts building more of a culture of trust.
So this is the piece that I think is interesting, is now that we have this increased sensitivity in the workplace, and you have, hang on, what was I going to say? I completely lost my train of thought. I was like, wow, that coffee is really good. So there's that piece that I think gets dropped. And I think it's more important now than it used to be. And that is because there's so much more sensitivity, so there's so much more kind of investigating things.
Mm-hmm.
So people come and say something that you have to investigate.
Yeah.
You investigate it, you realize it doesn't really rise to the level of breaking a policy, or it's whatever that is. And then everybody has to go back to work.
Mm-hmm.
But all of that lack of trust, that breakdown in trust through the process needs to be rebuilt. And I think that it's a really difficult. It's difficult to rebuild that trust. It really takes focus, attention. And I think I want to say our generation, but I think the older generation are more like, just get on with it, guys. We all got on with it. You can get on with it too. But I don't think that's the way the younger generation are feeling anymore. They're like, no, I don't need to get on with it because I'll just go get a job somewhere else.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I hear that a lot. And I always tell employees, I'm like, you could go to a different job, you could transfer out, you could leave, but you're always going to encounter at least one person in your work environment that is going to challenge you, or you're not going to get along with, or everything they do. And that's not the answer, is to move on and not deal with it. But I also think that it's important for businesses and employers to recognize that this is the workplace. And
right.
So we need to educate people on that. What is a microaggression? I recently truly understand now what a microaggression is. And a lot of people, especially older generations, millennials up, they don't understand what that truly is. And I was explaining to an employee this week, actually, I'm like, I don't think this is your intent, but these subtle little slights to your coworkers come off as microaggressions. And I was like, I really encourage you to look that up and what this looks like. And even if someone comes to HR and they complain and they're like, I want you to do this, and there's some resolution, there's a lot of feelings that still linger, and it's being self-aware and talking about, this is definitely a generation that people want to talk about their feelings and past traumas, and it's harder for them to move on. So it's like, how do we somewhat embrace that, but also be able to move forward so we can be productive?
And I think that there's actually has to be a system in place to do it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that our workforce at this point, in general, just generalizing, is equipped with the skill sets to do that alone. For example, that a situation I had at your company recently, 2 women who hadn't spoken to each other for a whole year, who work together, who I know have come to see you multiple times each. It's impacting the whole team, the feeling, the lack of communication, the lack of knowledge transfer. And we had a 2-hour conversation. I facilitated a 2-hour conversation with those 2. And then the following week, I get an email from both of them saying, oh my God, we just had this most completely normal interaction. We did this, I helped her with that. It went from such a dysfunctional place to just, and my whole thing is like, it is going to be rocky. Yeah. Like it's going to take time to build that trust up, and it's going to very easily be destroyed again. Mm-hmm. Like one of you just says one thing and the other person just takes it the wrong. Like we're at a very vulnerable place. So you need to use us to help make sure the two of you continue to communicate. Just that conversation that really needed to happen between the two of them a year ago. And they weren't equipped to have that conversation. And I don't think they felt enough trust with their manager to have their manager help them with the conversation. So then it just escalates and they're coming to you with stuff that you're like, what is this even? It doesn't even, because
Yeah.
it's not about that anymore. It's about the fact that the two of them are terrified to actually really truly communicate with each other.
Yeah. I think that comes back to the manager too, of like management recognizing like,
Right.
hey, early on that, hey, there's potential conflict here. When identifying that instead of saying, oh, they'll get over it. I think that's like what a lot of managers these days are used to of, oh, they'll just get over it. They'll move on, especially in healthcare. It's people are licensed professionals. It's fast paced, it's changing, it's always evolving. But at the same time, no, like you need to, people start being resentful. And the more it goes on, and then you get into a situation like we were in where we're like, we can't, I don't even know, I was biased in all different ways that I'm like, we need to bring somebody else in and deal with it. And I also think it's important for HR professionals to know that like we can't handle it all the times and we will have our biases. And when it's important to engage in an outside party to come in, especially so that employees see that we're trying. I think that's a big message to employees of like, having a third party, HR not being involved, not knowing everything that you're talking about with the employees,
Right.
looking for resolution in a non-punitive way is very important for organizations to consider, because we, especially small organizations where you might not be able to have a huge HR department. It's like there's always that option of seeking outside support. And we've done that at our organization for years. Especially like in investigations where you're like, I've been through this already. This is years. And it's like, we need to get an outside opinion because clearly we can't handle the situation.
There just comes a moment where you can't be perceived as being neutral anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
Even if you are still neutral, it's the perception. And I think that's where a lot of managers get into a knot, is that they want to be able to support the team, but they're just not going to be perceived as that neutral party in the conversation anymore.
And again, back to like our earlier conversation, HR becomes a scapegoat for management a lot of times. So especially if you have a leader who's not a strong leader and they can't speak to how they're really feeling about a situation, it's easy for them to be like, HR just told me this or this, that, when it's no, you're the manager. You have the ability to have these conversations and make your decisions. Like it's not HR's role to make that. We help guide you. But I think that's where I see a lot of this happen.
I think that also, I'm just going to put that as a note. I think that also has to be in the manager's training. Don't use HR as a scapegoat. Like that there is going to kick you it's not a long-term solution.
And I've even had employees be like, oh, that's completely different than what my manager said. And I'm like, but I always try not to protect management, to be like, well, maybe they did not know. And so we look like we're aligned. But when your management and leadership team aren't aligned with HR, it's going to be a cluster. Like I can tell you, it just doesn't look good. It looks like nobody knows what they're doing or talking about. And it's just a vicious cycle to get yourself in.
Yeah. But that was a cycle. What else? What's something that people would be surprised to find out about you?
Oh, God, that's a good question. I always say this, and it's so silly, but I was New Jersey's #1 race walker in the 4th grade. Hey, I don't know. That's
expecting the 4th grade. Wow, unexpected the 4th grade.
I think a lot of people, when they first meet me, I use my hands a lot. I use my facial expressions. They might be a little turned off by me, I think, like that I have a very strong personality. But I think that the more you get to know me, like especially our employees where I work, like I really do care about what I do. And some people, I continue to do what I do as an HR professional only because I do care and I do love what I do. I love working with people. And I think that people would be surprised at that, to be like, I hate when people are like, oh, I could never do what you do. Like, how do you do this? And I've created boundaries in my work and my life where it's really nice to come home, and my husband has no idea what I do, really. Like, he doesn't. So I don't have to come home. I don't come home and vent. I put that barrier up. I have a 2-year-old son. I want him to be proud of his mom, but at the same time, I need to engage with him and be a mom when I'm at home, and dealing with work stuff. It comes up, but I think, yeah, I don't know. I think people would be surprised just off the bat that I'm really a humble person.
That you love people. I love it.
Yeah, I really do. And I think that's like where my passion to work with people, even as a young child, like whether that was me wanting to be a nurse or a social worker, like I've always had that common like theme in my life of loving to work with people. And as much as some days I hate my job, I overall just love the career path I've taken, and I try to be as optimistic as I can, even when I feel like I've hit rock bottom.
Yeah, you're such an asset to the hospital.
Yeah.
You really are.
Thank you.
You've got a shining career. I really appreciate, like, there's a lack of ego with you in what you do. You really want to just fix the problem, however
Yeah. I will say one of the things that really, when early in my career, I went to a conference, and it was an HR and healthcare conference. And Cy Wakeman was like the keynote speaker, and she was on this whole no ego kick. That was her campaign, and ditch the drama. And that really resonated with me. I don't know. But at the same time, that people are people also at the end of the day. And there's a balance. And also, I think people like yourself who like we can reach out to and use as a resource as HR professionals. And for me specifically, it's like I'm learning from you, so it helps. So I think that's the biggest thing is, again, like reaching out outside of like your HR department, outside of your organization for resources, because it's also like an opportunity for you as a professional.
Thanks, Lauren.
Thank
It's been
you.
a pleasure always to chat with you.
Thanks, Helena.